debate time.
I want to be your next governor.
Lupe Valdez, the former Dallas County sheriff, in one corner.
Beat the expectations tonight.
Andrew White, a Houston businessman and son of the late Governor Mark White, in the other. We're bringing you the one and only face-off between the two just days before early voting for the runoff begins.
Thanks for joining us for our special show leading up to tonight's debate. I'm Karina Kling. The Democrats vying for their party's nomination are hoping to do what no one else in their party has done since 1994, win a statewide seat in Texas. Both Lupe Valdez and Andrew White know it's an uphill battle against a well-funded and popular incumbent, but they believe the political climate may be ripe for an upset. First, they have to get past each other.
Democratic voters have a choice to make on May 22nd.
I want to be your next governor.
Lupe Valdez, who left her position as Dallas County sheriff last year to run for governor.
And I'm pledging to you.
Or Andrew White, who's an entrepreneur and the son of a former governor.
Let's get to work.
Valdez finished first in a crowded March primary field. She represents the progressive side of the party, supporting gay marriage, abortion rights, and has tussled with Governor Greg Abbott over so-called sanctuary cities.
The tone needs to be set so there can be workable solutions.
White describes himself as a moderate Democrat. He's laid out several policy proposals aimed at boosting public education funding and growing jobs, but he's had problems with his own party for his personal anti-abortion stance, though he says he respects a woman's right to choose.
I support Roe v. Wade. It's the law of the land, has been for 40 years.
Friday's debate comes at a pivotal time for both candidates. Valdez trying to prove herself on a statewide stage after recent struggles to articulate her stances on issues and how she'd run Texas.
Now we got a lot of work to do.
White looking to convince Democratic voters they can trust a moderate to fight for them against Governor Abbott in the fall.
We beat the expectations tonight.
Both knowing they have a David and Goliath battle ahead for November.
The debate gets underway in just under 30 minutes now. It's happening in East Austin. That's where we find our Max Gordon. Max, give us the rundown of how the debate's going to work tonight.
Karina, I'm here at the St. James Episcopal Church where preparations have been going on all day, and as you can hear, the room is starting to fill up. Now, in just moments, Lupe Valdez and Andrew White will take a seat at the table behind me where they will engage in the one and only Democratic debate before an audience of about 250 people. Now, the candidates will answer questions from the moderator, Gromer Jeffers, a reporter for the Dallas Morning News. The candidates will also take pre-screened questions from the audience and from viewers watching online. Earlier today, Democrats helping organize tonight's debate said they hope voters will get a clear sense of the candidates, but they wouldn't go so as far as to say if they'd be disappointed, or if they are disappointed rather, that this will be the lone debate before the runoff election day, which is on May 22nd.
We're just happy that we can bring the candidates together in public so that folks can really get to hear from their issues or about their issues and how they differ ahead of the runoff election.
Now, this is, of course, going to be a big moment for both of these candidates, but the big question of tonight will be, will enough voters be watching for either candidate to be able to move the needle? Karina?
Thank you very much. We'll be checking back in with Max. Our political analyst, Democrat Harold Cook, and Republican Ted DeLisi will also be with us throughout the evening. Let's start with the stakes. How high are they for this debate?
Well, especially if you're Andrew White, they're extremely high. This is perhaps his last chance to change the dynamic of this race. Look, I mean, Lupe Valdez came out of the first round of primary voting in the lead by a lot. Andrew White has to make up that difference somehow. This has been a snooze of a race, frankly, and it hadn't garnered much in the way of headlines. Neither one of these candidates have raised much money, so they haven't been able to communicate voters through earned media and certainly through paid media. This debate, believe it or not, is his last chance to change the dynamic of it. It is her last chance, too, in a way, because she squandered all of her previous chances to communicate with voters effectively, mainly because she's failed to articulate her positions very well.
What are Republicans looking for in this debate tonight, Ted?
Attack each other as much as possible. I think there's actually an interesting dynamic here is, I think if Andrew White wants to try to distinguish himself tonight, he's got to figure out why is he the best candidate. And sometimes to say I'm the best candidate, he says I'm the only one that can do, I'm the only businessman, I'm the only, he has to try to differentiate himself in a way. You know, I was like kind of looking at the introduction package, and it's like, you know, she's the progressive Democrat and he's the moderate Democrat. If that's the perception, he's going to lose. He has to shake up this race. And honestly, she seems unsteady enough in her previous public appearances. She could make a mistake tonight. And we all know that a mistake in politics now is replayed thousands of times on cell phones and on YouTube. So it's amplified. It won't just be in a church in East Austin. She's speaking to a statewide audience of Democrats who I think are looking for some sort of fight in how Greg Abbott, who can take on Greg Abbott this fall.
Just real quickly, but you know, it's a Friday night, it's 7 o'clock. How many people do you think will be watching? Do you think this will make a difference?
I think interest in this whole race has been low, and I think interest in this debate is relatively low when you compare it with, you know, Democratic primary voters statewide. That said, Ted is exactly right. If somebody scores big or if somebody messes up big, it'll be all over the newspapers and YouTube and social media, and that will get some play.
I want to turn to Governor Abbott's attacks on Valdez. He's long treated her as the presumptive Democratic nominee, even though White is still in this race. Yesterday, he took it up a notch. Our Max Gordon explains.
If you go to lupevaldez.org, you might not get what you bargained for.
Lupe Valdez, too liberal for Texas.
Governor Greg Abbott's re-election campaign purchased the domain and turned it into its latest attack on Valdez, treating her as the presumptive Democratic gubernatorial nominee.
This is a fairly brazen move, but it's not unheard of.
Texas Politics Project Director Jim Henson says the Abbott campaign is trying to steer the conversation after a sleepy primary.
I think this signifies, a campaign that's not going to take anything for granted in an environment that is uncertain.
Valdez responded to the attacks Thursday, saying the new Texas that I'm fighting for is one where all Texans have opportunities to succeed. There is nothing too liberal about that.
And I want to be your next governor.
Valdez may be widely seen as the Democratic frontrunner, but her runoff opponent, Houston businessman Andrew White, insists he'd be the more competitive candidate against Governor Abbott in the fall.
Our message of bringing sanity and reason back to state government is a message that he frankly doesn't want to have to come up against.
White says he's not concerned about Abbott's lack of attention now.
I don't need an extra few shots from Greg Abbott. I'm sure there'll be plenty coming as soon as the runoff's over.
Texas banned sanctuary cities. Lupe Valdez has promised to eviscerate that ban.
But as Governor Abbott continues to draw distinctions between himself and Valdez,
Lupe Valdez wants to reverse that.
Texans are getting a clearer picture of what that matchup may look like post-runoff.
So, Ted, I want to ask you this first. Smart move on Abbott's part to do this before the runoff has even happened.
I'm a big believer in define your candidate before they define themselves, or potentially before they define you, and so this falls into that category. What I find most interesting about how Abbott is going after Lupe Valdez is that he's going after her by saying she is the most liberal candidate on abortion. So he's basically telling Democrats, you cannot trust Andrew White on pro-life or pro-choice issues. You should trust Lupe Valdez. This is the kind of most subterranean and skillful way, I think kind of underreported by some of the press, to understand that Abbott is kind of, through his own megaphone, telling Democrats to vote for Lupe Valdez. And Valdez, I think, and weirdly enough, a more aggressive, more astute Andrew White would turn that into a net benefit for him, but he doesn't seem capable of even understanding kind of exactly what's going on.
Well, do you think this could come back to bite Abbott doing this so early, or do you think this is a good strategic move on his part?
I think it's a really interesting strategic move. I think it's an unnecessary one too. But look, I think that a lot of media has missed the boat on this. This is in no way Greg Abbott starting the general election early. This is Greg Abbott and his supporters communicating with Democratic voters and trying to engineer the Democratic primary. He is using against Lupe Valdez the very things that Lupe Valdez herself would put on TV if she had the money to do it. And it wasn't just this video. They trotted out a Right to Life group today that criticized Andrew White and wanted him to go back to his original pro-life stance. Which, look, if you're a Democratic voter, you don't want to hear that about Andrew White. And if you're a Democratic voter, you want to hear about Lupe Valdez, everything the governor said. He wants to make sure that Lupe Valdez is the nominee.
Yeah, I mean, we saw him get involved in the primaries in the Republican side of things, and kind of maybe that came back to haunt him with the names that he was. I know Representative Sarah Davis said she was, basically campaigning for me here.
I mean, I believe two things. I believe he is helping to define her, and he's nudging the electorate and maybe even the Democratic runoff electorate in a direction he would like them to go. I agree.
Some name recognition
I agree with Harold.
that.
But what he's really doing is he's identifying the fact that normally these candidates would be making their own news, and we wouldn't really care about what Greg Abbott puts up a dummy website here only a few weeks before the election. But there is such a lack of fight among both these candidates and such a lack of intensity about both these candidates that I think that there is some question as to whether or not how bad do either of these candidates want to be the Democratic nominee and go up against Greg Abbott. And we saw that Lupe Valdez has so little message discipline. She managed not only to drag down her own campaign, but to criticize Beto O'Rourke for being bad with Hispanics, which is a race she's not even in. I am perplexed and puzzled as to whether or not either of these candidates are ready for prime time.
What about White? What if Abbott were to go up against White? Kind of what we've been talking about, but how do you see that race playing out?
You mean in a general election?
Yes.
See, here, that's why I'm puzzled why Abbott's trying to socially engineer the Democratic primary. This is a man, Greg Abbott, who is arguably the most popular politician in Texas right now. He is sitting on $40 million plus, and whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to have less money in the bank than a typical state representative candidate. They have not caught the world on fire yet. I hope somebody gets better at this, but I mean, I'm not even excited about this race yet, and I'm a Democrat. So, I mean, look, I'm not exactly sure what he's so concerned about, unless he just thinks this is going to be the worst year for Republicans ever. He's not going to take anything for granted, and if that's the case, more power to him. But I don't think he has to socially engineer this thing, because honestly, if he runs against Valdez at this point, he would beat her, and if he runs against White at this point, he would beat White.
Guys, stick around. We're going to get back to you in a little bit. But coming up next are the candidates sticking to the facts on the campaign trail. Gardner Selby of PolitiFact Texas is in to put them to the truth-o-meter right after the break. Welcome back to our special coverage of the Valdez-White debate. Throughout the campaign, both candidates have made several claims that have raised some eyebrows. So we've been putting them to the Texas Truth-o-meter, and leading that effort to set the record straight, Gardner Selby of PolitiFact Texas, headquartered at the Austin American-Statesman. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Ready to go?
I'm ready. We're ready for this. Excited to see how it all turns out. And first of all, how many times have you fact-checked each of these candidates?
We have posted 3 fact checks of Andrew White, 2 of Lupe Valdez. We have another one of Valdez in the field, so to speak. We're doing the research now, and we rely on listeners, readers, viewers to tell us if they hear something or see something.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to pick the latest 2 from each of these candidates to talk about today. First up is Lupe Valdez. She's often said that the struggles that she went through and kind of her life story is what makes her a good candidate for this. She said something about where she came from recently. What was this?
That's right. She was talking to Ken Herman of the American Statesman and said this: "I come from the poorest zip code," she said, "in San Antonio. I come from the poorest zip code in San Antonio."
So what zip code was that?
Well, of course, she lives in Dallas now, but she grew up on the west side of San Antonio, which many know is a historically poor area. The zip code, 78207. There's something intriguing about this. In 1963 is when zip codes kicked in nationally, so there wasn't a lot of perfect research showing us poverty rates during her growing up years. But we did get some numbers starting from 1960, including 1989, including a recent 5-year period, and it does shake out that she spent her childhood in an area that was long home to the greatest number of people in poverty.
So when putting that to the truth-o-meter, how did she rate?
There's a slight twist. Other less populous zip codes sometimes had a greater share of people in poverty, and that's why this ended up mostly true on the truth-o-meter.
All right, let's turn to something Andrew White said. He's said along the campaign trail that he wants to step up sex education in schools, but kind of took it a step further. What's going on here? He did an interview with Texas Public Radio, and he talked about the lack of sex education in Texas. You might have tape on this? We do have tape. Let's listen to what he had to say.
There's a large number of schools in Texas that don't even offer sex education.
So who tracks this? Where did he come up with these numbers?
It's a group Capitol folks would be familiar with. The Texas Freedom Network did a study, and they found that in 2015-16, 25% of school districts were not offering sex education in middle and high school. Also, nearly 60% of schools were offering what they call abstinence-only education, which breaks out to no instruction in using contraceptives. There's another wrinkle to this. There's a 2009 law that came into place that basically told high schools you no longer have to require students to take a health class, and that might explain some decrease in the number of students who are getting sex education.
So it sounds like he's kind of on the right track here with a large number of Texas schools not providing sex education?
A majority of schools still offer sex ed, but certainly not to the extent that perhaps he was thinking of. We rated this one partially accurate. It is half true. You leave out some details.
Half true for White. I wonder if people are keeping a rating here. Let's go back to Valdez. Immigration, a big issue with her tussling with the incumbent governor over this a lot over the years and even into this campaign. She made a comment about crimes committed by unauthorized immigrants. What did she say?
Last July, even before she was thought of as a possible gubernatorial candidate, she was quoted saying that Texas Department of Public Safety numbers show that 1.6% of crime is committed by unauthorized immigrants.
Wow, 1.6%.
Only 1.6%.
Yeah, that low. Where did that information come from? Where did she get that?
Well, let me share it with you first. Nationally, there is research indicating very little crime is committed by such immigrants. Valdez did not unpack to us how she got to her percentage. We never got there as far as understanding her methodology. We did do a back-of-the-envelope calculation with help experts, including Tony Fabello, the criminologist, and found that about 5% of arrests in recent years would have involved unauthorized immigrants in Texas, about 5%. But we sure wouldn't take that to the fact bank.
So nationally speaking versus Texas speaking, kind of more looking towards those national numbers?
That's the science, or the best research we could find that would get us close to there, and that's a reason that we ended up at a rating of this claim of half true, partially accurate, but we really needed a lot more information to understand where her percentage came from.
All right, Valdez with a half true rating there. Back to Andrew White, another comment about Texas schools, this time how they rank. What did he say?
He had a kickoff speech, and you've heard him say this, I bet, a few times since. I think you have tape of him talking about where Texas schools rank nationally.
Let's listen to that.
For schools, we're 43rd in the nation. Let me say that again. We're 43rd in the nation.
I have heard him say that. I've heard others say that. Walk us through where he got this number and whether it's accurate.
Education Week, it's a national publication, does these kinds of rankings. They take into account various things, including school funding, student achievement, how students do after they graduate. That 43rd place ranking was headlined early 2016.
Okay.
But the same outfit has done rankings since then, and it's placed the Texas schools a little better, lately placed 40th.
Any looking outside of Education Week, other perspectives there?
We found some other rankings, but you're going to remember them better than me.
Well, maybe. I don't know about that. I'll fact check myself on that one. But so how did Andrew White come out when he said this particular claim about 43rd?
He said 43rd. It's more like 40th lately, and that's why this is mostly true on the PolitiFact Truth-O-Meter.
Mostly true? All right. I don't know. They kind of are ranking right there with each other on these. We'll see what happens with the next one.
Small sample size. Small sample size.
Okay. Gardner Selby, if you want to read these fact checks and more on these Democratic gubernatorial candidates, just head to politifacttexas.com. Gardner, thank you very much. And it's just about debate time. Our political analysts are back with us after the break to talk last-minute prep for the candidates. Welcome back. We are just about 6 minutes out from the start of tonight's Democratic gubernatorial debate. Our political analysts back with us, Democrat Harold Cook and Republican Ted DeLisi. I have to ask you guys, I know you've been with some of these candidates right before debate time. What's going through their mind? What are you telling them to try to keep them relaxed?
Well, if you're Lupe Valdez and her team, I mean, she should have been boning up on issues all week long. If she didn't, it's too late now. And if I were leading her team right now, I would just tell her to relax and kind of loosen up for the big game. If I were working for Andrew White, I would be going, it'd be kind of the opposite. I would be going over with him the 3 or 4 zingers against Greg Abbott, the 3 or 4 possible zingers against Lupe Valdez. I would want him laser focused on all the ways there are to change the dynamic of the race.
You know, it's weird. I think sometimes candidates, they do feel a lot of pressure externally, and I think that sometimes the more coaching you get, and I've had both good and bad coaching experience, we don't have to go into that right now, Harold, but in my opinion, you kind of have to get up there and be who you are. Yeah. Right? I think one of the things in politics that's underestimated is the idea that you're someone that you're not, or that you're putting on airs. Things that are too coached sound too coached. I do think practicing your opening and closing is a good thing, but you know, there's no substitute for preparation. I agree with Harold. You know, you want to try to keep your candidate relaxed, joke around a little bit, send them out there. You know, we know from both of these candidates that they're not experienced politicians, that they haven't done a lot of debating. You know, some of the folks that I've been with before were legislators or Supreme Court justices or others. So this is one of those things where we really don't know how prepared they are. Right. They don't know how prepared they are. So we're expecting a lot tonight.
I'm guessing they're all watching from the green room right before they go on and watching us right now. Any last minute advice, Harold?
Yeah. Look, if you're Lupe Valdez, you need to seem knowledgeable and likable. If you're Andrew White, you need to be very aggressive. But I don't disagree with Ted. You also need to be who you are as a human being, or it looks fake.
You know, I'm going to say something weird, and that is, I think sometimes candidates, they get in these positions and they feel like they have to know everything or they have to give an answer. The worst thing you can do is give an answer you really don't know the answer to. All you can do sometimes is say, you know, that's, you know, I'll leave you to, especially if it's some sort of kind of nerdy, you know, answer about a policy question, you just have to say what's in your heart. You don't have to prove that you're smarter than the next person. You're already one of the two people that are going to be Democratic nominee. Just kind of tell people what you believe. And if you do it in an authentic way, even if you score points or don't, I still think voters will respect that.
Do you think it helps them to be in front of a studio audience, or just people there being there, 250 people that are expected to
I do. I will say, when you're just in a studio with no audience, then you don't get any feedback, and it just gets weird, especially if you've been on the campaign trail for months and months with live audiences everywhere you go.
Like us every night.
It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing to say, and I'm going to say it. If there's a bad moment, a studio audience always makes it worse, because they'll boo, they'll clap, they'll cheer, they'll jeer. And so I've always think that whatever's happening in the studio is amplified if someone makes a mistake.
It's all coming up very quickly. We're going to take a quick break. The debate is set to begin right at 7. We'll bring it to you live at the top of the hour.